Hello, and welcome to my Fire Emblem 15 ETC playthrough. I'm US's Gordon Captain, here with...
Coffee. Hi.
And we're watching the final episode of Valentia Saga, War of the Killer Bow.
Out on 3DS since 2017.
So, the major episode difficulty here is going to be getting Alm to kill Duma. Duma has 200 HP, and after he reaches 52 HP, he can no longer be damaged by any unit that is not named Alm. So, the first objective of this map is going to be to get a unit to Duma that can actually fight Duma at a reasonable rate. There's exactly one unit we have in our army that can do that, and his name is Cliff.
Oh god.
Now, Cliff's offensive stats are actually kind of bad for this map. He has 28 strength, which was a blessing in the Rudolph map, because he would be able to one-round Rudolph. But in this map, it's bad, because Cliff does 51 damage to Duma after a crit, and so if he crits Duma 3 times in a row, which is actually fairly likely to happen, he is not going to be able to, on the 4th attack, do any damage at all.
Oh, that's suffering from success.
The other objective is going to be getting Alm to Duma. The most important way to do this is to use units like Est and Claire to swap various important units to closer positions, as well as getting Faye and Silk to use Warp and Rescue to get Alm to Duma on the second turn. So on turn 1, Duma attacks Cliff. Not a really important fight, but as you can tell, Cliff had 58 crit and is going to crit him twice in a row. This double crit is going to make killing Duma a significant amount harder. Those two Bow Knights there are actually extremely nasty enemies that Cliff just one-rounded. If you didn't have a Cliff that was a super jacked unit, it would be insanely hard to beat this map in 2 turns. So now we get to see that Est and Claire are the best units in the game because they can use swap.
You know, Fire Emblem, it's a game about counting squares and doing math.
Yeah, and also trying to kill off your units. Unfortunately, I couldn't kill off Faye, and that wouldn't let me unlock Faye's good ending, so I didn't feel like killing off Gray to unlock Claire's good ending, or Clive to unlock Matilda's good ending.
You know, it's not so much about unlocking Faye's good ending as, like, unlocking a good ending for the poor sod from Ram Village who marries her.
Yeah, that's fair. So now that I've cleared the way, it's time to rescue Alm and then warp Alm. So here I get to actually use a trick where I get to trade the speed ring to Alm before warping him. This will allow Alm to move 3 tiles in the swamp instead of 2, because the speed ring gives him 6 movement and Alm suffers 2 pain from the swamp. So this is an example here of Cliff suffering some success. He crit him twice in a row, and then he crits him. Now he crit Duma the second time. But Alm still is just going to go for the yellow attack. Unfortunately, since they didn't play the It's Over Duma, we know that Alm didn't crit.
That's okay, we got 10 turn wheels.
Yeah. Reliability. What's your apology?
Well, you know, Cliff, we know for a fact that the RNG was reset because this round of combat ends with Cliff falling off a cliff straight into Valhalla.
Alright. However, Cliff died, and say it with me. If he dies...
He dies.
And it's over, Tuma. So he's actually dead. Congratulations, Cliff, on being the only unit to die in the entire... So, some people on Fishcord asked me some questions about this run. Toffee, do you have any good examples? Oh, sorry. Before I do that, I should mention 6 people who really helped me throughout this run. Those were General Horus, Karma, Crash Boombang, the Chungler, Juan776, and Carmine Sword. Thank you very much for your help. You guys helped me with new strats, new ideas, new movement tactics, and developed new meta strategies. Without these people, this run would have not been really very possible. And now on to the questions.
All right. So, how much would things change without turn wheels?
So, turn wheels massively impacted a couple of strategies and didn't impact much at all for a few others. The biggest impact by far of turn wheels was Mire dodges. Mire has 70 accuracy. Many units die in 2 or 3 hits from one.
Down a little.
Then Mire hit the benchmarks. The other issue with Mire dodging was that Mire has a lot of damage, and while you can't really rely on Mire dodges, players' units die when they fail to dodge Mire, but you can rely on Mire dodges with turn wheels. The other major advantages were crits and avoiding low impact events. So crit rigging, there's a ton of crit rigs in this run. There were Brave Sword crits, Killer Bow crits, Hunter's Volley crits. Killing Jetta was a crit rig. There were so many different crit rigs in the run. None of those would have been realistically a very viable strategy without turn wheels. But for the most part, most of those crit rigs would have just gone, you failed to crit this guy, I just take an extra turn. But a couple of the enemies, most notably Canors, you couldn't do that, so you would have to find backup strats. The other thing is low percent crits. So enemies like Witches, which would have 2 or 3% critical, you could completely ignore those 2 or 3% chances of critting without turn wheel. With turn wheels, without turn wheels, you'd be writhing in fear anytime you see a displayed crit above 1. The final major change was in hit rates. So player units do not have perfect accuracy. A lot of player units might only have 90 displayed hit, or 91, or 85 displayed hit on an enemy. And with turn wheels, it's fairly reasonable to just turn wheel back anytime you miss. Without turn wheels, you can't do that. So a lot of strategies that relied on strings of 90%ers hitting. Well, 10 90%ers hitting is only about 45% to happen. Whereas string of 35% chance of happening. And then on top of that, a strategy which relied on like a turn wheel, suddenly you have a much higher chance of hitting that because it's probably only one miss that happens. So now you're like 90% to hit it again. And so that's the biggest change for turn wheels.
What was the biggest increase in reliability gained from allowing grinding?
So, Silk. The only real reason I grinded was because Silk makes me want to throw my 3DS out the window every time I use her. She was, in fact, 100% of the reason I started grinding in the first place was because she's a pain in the butt. And most of the grinding was a result of her. Every other unit that received grinding was mostly just, hey, we're grinding now, so we might as well grind more. But realistically speaking, it was just Silk. If you look at Juan776's DLC percent LTC, he almost exclusively grinds to improve Silk and get Silk to warp before the Ram Valley. And pretty similar thing here. I grinded almost exclusively to get Silk Warp before Zofia Castle.
No, I don't see what the problem is with Nosferatu's 60% accuracy. 60% of the time it works every time. Um, yeah, how would you have changed EXP distribution in hindsight?
So the biggest change would have been Physic Fae. I would have trained Fae to learn Physic before Zofia Castle instead of after Zofia Castle at the expense of Python EXP. The main reason I did it in the other way was because I expected Fae to not need Physic in Zofia Castle itself. Turns out Physic Fae is really nice in Zofia Castle because it allows certain units to push themselves harder than they would before, and would allow me to 5-turn the map instead of going for the 6-turn I ended up going for.
All right. Which units surprised you with how good they were?
So, it was, from each route, the unit that impressed me the most in Alm's route was Claire. I was expecting Claire to be okay, but I wasn't expecting Claire to be 7th best in the game good. But she was. She was behind, the good units that were very good, like Alm and Faye and Silk and Tobin, Python and Clive, but she was better than everyone else. Claire had most of her value came from two things. First, she had really good res and speed, which meant that she could wield a decent weapon, and she could do damage with it. And the second is she had flight and 7 move. This pair of combinations meant that she could hit an enemy for a decent amount of damage, take some damage back, and let a more frail unit like Clive, or a unit, again, like Clive, who just barely doesn't hit the benchmark to kill this enemy, kill the enemy. This is notable in like Sluicegate. It happened in Border Battle. It happens in Arkwoods a lot. It happened in other places. And Claire's swap was very useful. Flying swap is much better than I gave it credit for. On Celica's route, there's just one answer, Valbar. Valbar learned Shove. And so Valbar had a lot longer of a shelf life than you would expect from a unit this big and bulky. He has 4 move, but he was able to do a lot of stuff early because he existed, which is something other units like Paula can't say. And then, on top of existing early, he learned Shove at a reasonable clip because he was able to fight so many enemies on enemy phase without needing assistance, unlike Bowie, who would not have been able to fight all those enemies without dying. So Valbar's ability to learn Shove was so much better than Bowie's that it ended up being better than Bowie at doing the thing I was expecting Bowie to do.
Mm-hmm. All right. And which units disappointed you the most that you didn't expect to?
All right, so the most disappointing unit was Matilda in Alm's route. She did okay stuff. She was okay. She ended up with like 12 battles and 10 kills. But more importantly, her combat wasn't very good because of her bulk. She could kill enemy calves with the Rider's Bane, and that was her primary contribution. She was also pretty decent against Arcanists. But her problems are her bulk. So she couldn't kill multiple enemy calves on enemy phase. She could kill one enemy cav on enemy. She needed to stay out of the way of enemy archers who would poke her to death otherwise. So she needed to sort of tiptoe around various types of enemies, whereas other units could just bulldoze their way through by that point in the game. She was able to do combat. She wasn't completely worthless, but she was nowhere near as good as you would expect her to be. And the other bad unit on Alm's route, I think, was Luthier. Luthier was worse than I was expecting, mostly because of my fault. I should have given him a speed ring as soon as I recognized that he wasn't going to hit the attack bench around Baron, and used him as sort of a chip bot instead of using what I did for, which is nothing. If he had the speed ring, he would have been able to double a couple of enemy Barons with his Excalibur spell, maybe a Bow Knight or two, and he would have been overall a pretty decent unit, but I didn't do that, so Luthier disappointed. On Celica's side, the most disappointing units were Paula and Katria. Paula was disappointing because she had bad bulk relative to what I thought she would have. Even in Act 4, when she was a Falconite, her bulk wasn't actually the best. She still died to a lot of enemies. And then her combat offensively wasn't as good as you would hope. She was able to get some crits to kill enemies, but that was the thing. She needed crits to kill things, whereas other units could kill them with more higher crit weapons or didn't need crits at all if they were Mei. Then Katria also disappointed, mostly because she couldn't promote. Promoting turns out to be really hard in this game if you're a Falco Knight, and Katria just suffered from the I didn't have extra map spawns to feed her kills, so she just couldn't get to promotion.
Moving away from the questions Fishcard had about the SOB side of things, I'm new to this whole ETC thing. I have a few questions. I heard ETC is this really mathematically sound and pure way to measure efficiency runs. What's your take on that?
Are you serious?
My.
Okay. So, efficiency runs do not take into account off-map activities, which, as we may notice, was over 1/3 of the game. So any time when I was rigging away map spawn that wasn't done on the map, it didn't take a turn, and the infinite repeated geometric series of 0 is still 0. The issues with other things. So growths were turn wheels kind of messed with things a lot because I just kept YOLO rigging crits because, well, turn wheels don't cost turns, so who cares? Other issue with ETC was that what actually ends up happening and what people think happens, efficient rigging was a great idea if you are a good player, but efficient rigging is really annoying. The idea of efficient rigging is that on the first turn of any map, if you rig a stat, it's a lot lower of an ETC penalty than if you don't rig the stat, than if you rig the stat somewhere else. This matters because a lot of the time, you have a unit that wants to hit 4, 5, or 6 different benchmarks. Radiant Dawn Jill, or Path of Radiance Marsha, or FE8 Seth, though FE8 Seth less so. Awakening Robin. These are all units, FE12 Chris. These are all units that would benefit a lot from just rigging their stats at specific times, at specific points, so that they could hit these hard-to-hit benchmarks that you want them to hit. That's complete nonsense. The other major issues with ETC, off-map stuff, efficient rigging, and math. ETC takes way too dang long to do. I'm one of the only 2 people who've ever finished. And there's good reasons for that, as I'm sure you can guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so most of the other ETC runs that we've seen use binomial growth patches rather than just using the base game. How much of a difference does that cause?
Okay, so it's a massive difference for 3 major reasons. The first is growth. The way growth work in ETC is closer to if-else statements than, oh, I need this javelin to hit. So, I had Mei in my Merc boat clear, missed the defense benchmark, which he hits 79% of the time. No big deal, I did a Valbar-based strategy instead. In Zophiak, in the final map of Rigel Castle, I had Rudolph, who had enough bulk, but my Cliff had 28 strength, so he got to just 100 volley crit him instead of trying some other strategy based around Rider's Banes. And this is just common. You can think of a growth stat not so much as, can I hit this benchmark? If no, sucks to be you. It's more like, did I hit this benchmark? Oh, yes, sweet, I got lucky. Or, oh no, okay, I'll do this other thing instead. And since they're if-else statements rather than if-then statements, it's a lot better. The second major issue with ETC is that if-then statements, it's a lot better. The 90% binomial problem is that the binomial distribution is a very poorly behaved function. And so naively, you would think you would end up at z equals 1.3 with your z-score for 90% binomials. But due to the way 90% binomials actually works, it's closer to z equals 2. This is because the binomial distribution for small values of n really pushes you far away from 90%. And there's a lot of small value of n quantization problems with them, whereby because you have to use a discrete number, you will end up with a situation a lot. Look at Rutger, for example, in FE6. 10-1 Rutger will has gained 0 points of strength on a 30% growth at level 6 under 90% binomials, even though 88% of the time he procs at once. And it actually will also speed and defense also don't get procced. Or rather, don't get also run into a cliff at 90% binomials. There's a lot of cliffing as a result of 90% binomials that people don't recognize because it's C. Yeah, next question.
Yeah, so like you mentioned earlier, you're the first person to actually complete a growths ETC run because nobody can do ETC math. How do you do that while also retaining your sanity?
So I don't do the exact math. I did a algorithm where I would approximate hit rates using a function based on the sine function, which is the way ETC math normally is, which is the way hit rates work in this game. I used e to the ix as the basis of the sine. And then on top of that, I would only calculate to within 1/20th of a turn. Anything less than 1/20, more than 1/20th of a turn, too much levels of precision. I use a method that's sufficiently imprecise that 1/20th of a turn is good enough. That's the main way. I just didn't calculate that precisely. And then turn wheels allowed me to ignore viable, likely, but still important events like 2% crits or 95% misses, which are extremely important if you're doing an efficiency run without turn wheels, but with turn wheels, you can ignore those.
And last of all, you mentioned you used e to the ix as your sine basis function. How often was your calculated ETC a complex number?
100% of the time, but it didn't matter because I took the vector. But it did matter once where I had a really large imaginary component and I didn't understand what was going on. So I just used a different approximation for sine. And it worked better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you got any future ETC projects in the pipeline?
I was planning on either doing Radiant Dawn, Heel Fall, or Lewd Record. Lewd Record sounded the most interesting because it has crown mechanic, but I couldn't find an English patch for it, so probably Heel Fall.
And can you mentioned you might do Radiant Dawn. Can you confirm if Swordmasters are good and Wyverns are bad?
One Swordmaster is good, one Wyvern is bad. Actually, Swordmaster is the fourth best class in Radiant Dawn, but Wyvern is an incredibly good class. It's just that one of the Wyverns is held back by Radiant Dawn's extremely jank level distribution and EXP curve in hard mode. All right, that was FE15 ETC completed in 154 turns. Bye-bye.
Yeah.